Hello, everybody, and welcome to Busy Playing Something, episode 6. This is the Busy Playing Something podcast right here on YouTube, as well as if you are listening to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and everywhere else you can find it. My name is Sean, and I am your host for today, and I'm also joined by the one who is finally getting his way, it seems like. It feels like PlayStation's starting to listen to us. Joshua LaRosa, do you feel heard?
No, not really. I feel like the years of whinging and whining has resulted in something shivered down Shuhei's spine, and they're like, "Oh, we need to do something. He's onto us." So no, we'll definitely cover that. But how you been? We missed a week.
Yes.
So there's that. We had a lot going on. I started my first week of my new job. Before we even get into anything, I want to ask you a question because my wife Naomi, she always looks at me weird when I do this. Now, I'm not a madman. When I eat my cereal, I knew someone who used to put the milk in first.
Yeah, you don't do that.
And then the cereal. That's like serial killer type energy going on. But I do have my cereal in a mug. I have the preference to have my cereal in a mug. Where does that sit with you? How do you feel about eating cereal in a mug? I don't know. I've always done it, and when I think about it, I can't even process why I would want to do it. Because now that I think about it, you put the cereal in, you put your milk. And that means the cereal, let me just put it, that's in the middle half of the mug down at the bottom is just going to be covered in milk. And I guess would go soggy. You would think so, right? But for me, I feel like the mug is the perfect perfect holder of the perfect amount of cereal. So I feel like the cereal to milk ratio is right. And because there's the certain amount of cereal in there, by the time I get to the point where the milk's sitting, it's still crunchy, and then at the end you can drink the milk.
Yeah, no, nobody does that.
No, okay.
No, but why use a mug? Like, you've already got a bowl. There's not enough room for the spoon to get around. Like,
I exclusively use teaspoons. I'm a teaspoon guy. Even when I'm having soup, I use a teaspoon.
But that's like 4 Fruit Loops, not even.
Yeah, I know. But then you get to, I feel like
but that's more mouthfuls that you're taking.
All right, I'm gonna stop you.
Are you just trying to limit like how much you're eating instead of taking big spoonfuls?
Let me tell you,
you're like little tiny mouthfuls, like a little rabbit, like a child.
Cereal is a casual breakfast food, right? It's a casual thing. You're not going, look, for example, you don't go to a cafe and have cereal, right? Cereal is a casual, relaxed environment breakfast food.
And so everything else is competitive.
Yeah. Well, if you're eating an egg, you got to eat it before it gets cold. Like a cereal, you're supposed to do it casually. And you're supposed to have time when you eat cereal. So in my eyes, if you're eating cereal with a tablespoon, you're effectively, you might as well just eat out of a dog bowl, is what I'm trying to say. Cereal's supposed to be eaten slowly.
No, it's not.
It's a casual breakfast item, I'm telling you.
If you eat cereal slowly, that's where it goes soggy. The idea is you've got to put the cereal in. The milk is there to kind of soften it a little bit, but by that stage, you're already downing the hatch.
It depends on how much milk you're putting in.
I thought you'd say something weird, like you put orange juice in instead of milk. Like, that's weird.
No, but people don't do that, do they?
Yeah, people do that. See, people do that,
or
and
water.
That's weird. Yeah, or water. Like, you don't have Nutri-Grain and water, right?
No,
but you don't put Nutri-Grain in a mug.
Oh, man, that's my favorite thing. My favorite thing.
The traffic lights don't fit.
It works. I'm telling you, it's a casual breakfast item. Casual is the key word in no one's going out and ordering cereal. If you're eating cereal in a rush, you shouldn't be eating cereal. At that point, grab a muesli bar and you need to be out the door. If you've got the time to have cereal, I'm thinking you're sitting at a table, you're relaxed, right?
Yeah, you're sitting at a table. Yeah, exactly. Sitting at a table with a bowl in front of you. If you've got it in a mug, it's like you're in a rush.
No, so the mug thing, I only do that if I'm having cereal at night. So sometimes I'm a bit peckish and I want to snack on anything bad, so I'll have some cereal in a mug with the teaspoon.
But you were talking about breakfast, and now you're like, oh, I have my cereal at night.
Well, I'm saying cereal is a casual breakfast item, but I also enjoy cereal at night.
We're talking about nighttime now.
You know what? I don't think you know what you're
you've
talking
changed
about.
the goalposts of the argument. You're like, oh, does anybody else eat their morning cereal out of a mug? Oh, because to take time. And now you're
I'm
like,
like the
actually,
Donald
I do it at
Trump.
night to take time before I have to go to bed.
I'm the Donald Trump of breakfast cereals.
You know,
He's just lying the
you don't
entire
even have
time.
a straight story on this.
No.
Okay, so all right, you know what? We're not even going to touch on that. All right, I reckon we've
Video
come full
games.
circle. Let's talk about video games, and there's plenty to talk about. So today we are going to be talking actually about Nintendo. We haven't really had a large scale conversation about Nintendo, where they're at and what's going on. So we'll have a little bit of talk about Nintendo's kind of plan on what they're doing with AAA and how that's different to PlayStation, Xbox, and kind of why that's working for them or why it may not be. We are also going to touch on, I mentioned earlier, about the thing that we've asked for a lot, potential PS3 backwards compatibility on the PS5. But we're going to start off with Nintendo. So their main topic today is, has Nintendo cracked the AAA code? So at the moment, AAA game development is in an interesting place. We have heard, I think there was an interview somewhat in the last week or so, or maybe last week or 2 weeks, where a developer came out and said, yep, these AAA development studios are actually coming out and saying, oh yeah, we're making this game years before full development has even started, to kind of avoid having, the closures or anything like that, or staff being taken. It's kind of like a fail safe where if we get people excited about this, we'll keep getting funding. Nintendo are on their own planet. They announce games, except for maybe Metroid Prime 4. They announce games when they're nearly done in the next 6 months. I think Zelda's
they are done.
Yeah, or they are done. I think Zelda is the only other one. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, they announced earlier, they were still working on it, to a degree where, okay, it's not going to come in the next 6-12 months, but they were working on it. It's coming. They wanted to let us know. Every other time, we had to look at the Nintendo Direct that we had a couple of weeks ago, and most of those games were coming this year.
Yeah.
So, Josh, I want to hear your thoughts on what is Nintendo doing and kind of why is that working for them and why is it different?
Yeah. And for me, I think it's just, you got to kind of look back. We're approaching, I'm approaching 30, or just slightly older than me, but we've been around long enough to remember the time where Nintendo was in direct competition with PlayStation and Xbox. And that's kind of going back to GameCube, right? PS2, Xbox, GameCube. And at that time, Nintendo were competing directly with Microsoft and Sony, and we're kind of one of the three making those AAA style boxes that plays, the most modern looking games. And, the GameCube wasn't a financial success. I think many people love it. I think Sean owns about 70% of all of them that have been sold. But it was a niche selling product. And then they transitioned to Wii. And I think that completely changed the game for Nintendo. And ever since then, they've been on their own path. And to Sean's point earlier, talking about AAA game development as is, looking at the industry more broadly, we know that games are taking longer to develop. They're costing more to develop. And the big publishers are trying to find different ways to increase profits earned on those titles. So if we look at Microsoft, we've covered it. We won't spend time on it, but they're bringing games to multiple platforms, sometimes, in some cases, day one. Sony are bringing their games closer and closer to being day and date in PC. Currently, that's just their multiplayer games, but there was a time where you wouldn't even imagine Sony launching a game on PC, let alone day and date, let alone thinking God of War Horizon would be there at all. So these big publishers are all trying to find ways to increase profits, but Nintendo seemingly have cracked the code. And that's kind of the core of the conversation. So, to your point, to your question, what is Nintendo doing that's, helping them do that? I think they've just got the right mix of, their games aren't graphically intense, right? They're costing far less to develop. They're developed over shorter periods of time in the main, maybe besides a Metroid or a 3D Mario or Legend of Zelda. They're costing less to make and they're selling more, which is, the perfect situation to be in. So I think Sony and Microsoft could learn a lot from what Nintendo are doing. And I actually think, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. I actually think we are seeing that. I think we are seeing games come out of Microsoft and Sony that are more, not Nintendo-like. Maybe Astrobot is more Nintendo-like, but Nintendo style in terms of size and scale, even coming out of Microsoft and Sony, which typically are your $200-300 million Spider-Mans and so on. So I guess I'll pass back to you. Do you, not so much agree or disagree with what I'm saying, but is there anything else I guess you could add to that point? And do you think Sony and Microsoft are taking a more Nintendo, or trying to adopt a more Nintendo style approach with some of their games?
Well, I think there's a difference between a Nintendo game and a game that releases on PlayStation and Xbox. Just generally, when you look at first-party titles, I think Xbox and PlayStation, because they are in direct competition in a sense with these sorts of games, they want to have the best-looking games. They want to have the largest games. The development cycle could take 5 to 6 years for these sorts of games. Nintendo do a lot of smaller games, but then again, they've also got the RPGs, like your Fire Emblems and stuff. They're 200, 300 hours easy if you want to put the time into it. And there's a lot of games with that replayability, like Mario's perfect, Mario Kart even. You've got that replayability that keeps you coming back to it. So you've never really finished the game. You can keep playing it. And I think we're starting to see, especially with when Game Pass was launched for Xbox, that was an opportunity for Xbox to kind of branch out a little bit. Rather than have their big AAA games, they started to have all, the independent games or the AA, the single A games on a service. So they were able to have smaller games as well as the larger games. But in terms of their first party, it's really intriguing that we're kind of getting to a stage where, a game like Hi-Fi Rush probably wouldn't have gotten made a few years beforehand, because it wasn't the type of direction that Xbox was going towards. But then it did come out. It was a shorter game. It looked like, in terms of graphics wise, it didn't look too intense. It had a really nice playability to it. Yeah, gameplay elements. It was different, and that's what Nintendo thrives on. They thrive on being different. So I think that, as much as that they've closed the studio, which is unfortunate, but I think we are starting to see that transition where, not only your Nintendo audience with the Switch and how successful that's been as not only a portable console but a home console, but also the mobile gamers. So PlayStation has had Genshin Impact, for example, and that's on mobile, that's on console, and that's a large game, but that's still got a simplistic replayability that's going to keep you coming back to it. And that game in particular is free to play. So I think they're starting to make it like a semi, not transition, but I think they're starting to open up their eyes to, well, we're currently investing a heap of time, a heap of money into these big AAA games, selling them full price, and then eventually whittling down that price to try and entice more customers to buy it. And then eventually it might be part of PlayStation Plus or whatever that may be, looking at other platforms. How else can we maximize profits? Whereas Nintendo, a full price game that came out on the Switch in 2017, like Mario Kart, is still full price because people will still buy these games at full price. You can have it for $5 cheaper secondhand, and people will always pay that full price because it's Nintendo. And the last part that I want to mention, and this is something that I've seen since, I think, the NES. So we're talking in the 80s. On Nintendo games, they had a little stamp, the Nintendo seal of approval or seal of quality. And that's the type of thing that is kind of played in our minds a little bit. And it's a great selling point that has developed over the decades. When you buy a Nintendo game, especially a first-party game, you're going to get quality. You're not going to have to worry too much about a day one update to fix broken bugs or anything like that. You know that the game that's shipped, more often than not, will work. And that's a plus as well.
So let's do that. Let's segment the three. Right, let's look at Nintendo exclusively, and then we'll move to the other ones, because it'd be interesting to kind of contrast and compare what one's doing versus the other, and see if there, I guess, is any crossover. So if we look at Nintendo, like we said, right, the games are cheaper to develop, and the development time is much shorter. So what we mean by that is the cost of a game, budget-wise, is mainly the people developing the game and the time spent. So everyone's got a salary, you know, in some parts of the world that salary could be upwards of $100,000+, if not more, for senior leaders in the team. And then you extend that over 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Well, that's where you get $200-300 million budgets, which is more in the Sony camp, which we'll talk about. So with Nintendo, right, like we said, so primarily a Japanese publisher, developer, right? So the yen's obviously much cheaper than USD in other regions across the world. Their staff are typically, I guess, paid less than Western developers. So this is all the business stuff that I've been reading into, right? So not that they're underpaid, they're just paid less, right? Like Miyamoto, I think, is on like 200 million, not 200 million. Let me find out exactly.
Might be 200 million yen.
Or, yeah, I'll maybe if you can Google that for me, how much Miyamoto's annual salary is.
Yeah.
But yeah, typically their salary is much less, and the scale of the games are smaller. So what we mean by smaller isn't that they're, you know, Breath of the Wild is a big game. So we're not talking about length or complexity. When we're talking smaller scale, we're talking, you know, Breath of the Wild doesn't have like motion capture, right? like a Hellblade or a Last of Us, where there's real people in the suits acting out the scenes and the camera's tracking them and they're building out the models. It's all animated.
So he gets paid $2 million.
$2 million,
and
right?
That's 2.02 million, and I'm pretty sure that's US.
That would be. Now look at someone like, well, you probably won't find like a Neil Druckmann. I don't know. See if you can find like a Neil Druckmann or someone that's well known.
It's literally the third. It's literally the third search in Google is just typing in Neil Druckmann. It's asking about his salary. So
anything in there?
No, they're talking about some other stuff. I'll find it in a sec though.
Yeah. What was I saying? Yeah. So they're not animated, right? In terms of even acting and voiceover, like the Nintendo games don't typically have a lot of voiceover, so that's a you know a huge cost. Marketing's all done in-house. You don't often see Nintendo go wild with like activations or anything like that unless it's a big game launching.
Here we go. I've got it.
Yeah.
So sorry, Neil Druckmann is estimated to make around $16 million a year, and even Hideo Kojima $19 million a year.
There you go. And Kojima's a Japanese developer in Japan, but that just shows you the contrast in terms of a AAA Sony style team versus what Nintendo's doing. And Miyamoto's like one of the greatest minds in the entire industry. So I think all those contributing factors, right? The fact that they're in Japan, the fact that the yen's less, the fact that they the fact that they earn less than Western developers on the whole, games are being developed in less time, and smaller in scale is leading them to be able to do this. And you think of a game like Breath of the Wild, for instance, that's one of their more expensive titles. I think that the average development, they estimate the development cost of that to be about 100 to 120 million. And the reason why people have worked that out is because they have said that they needed to break 2 million copies sold to break even. So you do the maths, and that kind of gave you a budget. So that's on the higher end, 120 million, right? So with that, we can kind of work backwards and estimate roughly the cost of everything else. So if that's 120 million, what is Animal Crossing costing? What, 50, 60 million dollars, if not less? And that's including marketing.
Yeah.
Spider-Man 2 cost $300 million.
How many copies did it sell?
They needed to sell 7 million to break even. I think they're probably closer to 10 now, but that's different, right? Spider-Man 2 selling $10 million with 7 of it needed just to break even versus $120 million and 31 million copies sold.
For Animal Crossing?
Breath of the Wild.
Or Breath of the Wild, yeah.
Right? Look at Animal Crossing. If we estimate $50 million to develop that game, it sold over 45 million copies. So the margin's incredible. So that's what we talk about Nintendo having that cracking the code, is them realizing the most popular games today played by not people of our generation, but the younger generation, the newer core gamers that are coming through, is games like Minecraft, games like Fortnite, games where the graphical intensity of the game isn't the be all end all, and it's all about the gameplay loop, the fun factor. And Nintendo realized that before this became a thing, and now everyone else is trying to catch up. So I blabbered on way too
That's all right.
long.
Well, I think one of the points that adds to the copies sold, and that's the copies sold. We really hold it in high regard when we're talking about first party games. You know, we're talking about Spider-Man, and they sold this many units. You know, 1 million units is considered like decent and that sort of stuff. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get costs back, but even Miyamoto would say that, you know, if they have one big hit every 3 to 5 years, they'll be okay. Now, to put that in perspective, they don't think that 1 million copies sold is a big hit for them. They think 30 million sold is a big hit. So double what Spider-Man did, right?
Triple.
Or triple what Spider-Man did, because they only did 10 million. Now, to put that in perspective, they've had 4 big hits on the Switch, and that's Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Super Smash Brothers Ultimate, and Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Odyssey rounds out number 5 at 27 million. So it's not considered a big hit, but that's still more than most other game. Like, that's huge for a console exclusive game compared to any PlayStation or Xbox game. And not
Still
only
3
that,
Spider-Mans.
yeah, exactly.
2s.
Not only that, Mario Kart 8 is over 61 million copies.
And it's a port of a Wii U game.
Of a Wii U game.
Much, with added stuff, right?
And so, yeah, basically Super Smash Brothers feels like that as well.
Sometimes. Yeah, exactly.
So
Nintendo have got a weird, like, you'd know this more than me, right? You're the larger Nintendo fan. Like, you look at those franchises, Mario Kart, Animal Crossing, Smash Brothers, Zelda, they're the same names that you would have rattled off 10 years ago.
Yep.
But they've got a way of reinventing their characters and their series that just make it sticky, right? Because a new Mario game comes out, it appeals to kids, but it also appeals to the adults who played Mario when they were kids. And it's the same series, but a completely different game. You're getting Mario sport games, you're getting Mario racing games, you're getting Mario RPGs. Where the other two players, being Microsoft and Sony, don't do that. And I don't think necessarily they should and or could do that as well. It's a very Nintendo thing. And the others have really, I guess, painted themselves in a corner with being in that high-end console market that they defined during the FTC trials with Microsoft and Activision, right? They spoke about, not seeing Nintendo so much as a competitor. Now, do you remember, I think it was a Shuhei interview, would have been 10 years ago, if not longer. Kind of spoke about... Do you remember this one interview? He spoke about, I think it was Shuhei, they spoke about how, Sony, he sees Nintendo as kind of, let me step back, that Nintendo gamers graduate to PlayStation or Xbox, right? Like they start their gaming journey with Nintendo, and then as they mature, they would look to buy a PlayStation or an Xbox. Do you agree that is still happening? Like, because the industry, the things have changed so much. Like, kids are playing on iPads and whatever now. Like, it's completely different than it was. But
well, if you look at, so even if let's just take that at face value. That, let's say 10 years ago, right? That happened. So let's say 2014, just as an example.
God, that's 10 years ago.
Yeah, I know, right? That's 2 years or a year and a half to 2 years into the Wii U, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the Wii U wanted to be its own console, right? It was still semi in comparison to, at the time, what was going to be the Xbox One and the PS4. It was kind of in that middle ground. It was still like basically challenging the end result.
Yeah, it was like a step between the PS3 and the PS4.
Yeah, well, yeah, 360 and PS3, yeah. Now, I would argue that it is no longer Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo. And I also think this is reading between the lines of what Xboxes was saying as well as part of that FTC hearing. You would buy a PlayStation or an Xbox and a Switch. Yeah. I think that the Switch it's in its own category, that you are not buying that in comparison to or to compete with another console. You're buying it as supplementary, because at the end of the day, you are going to find a breadth of more games that are available on both Xbox and PlayStation, third party wise, mostly, than you would find on the Switch. And so if you wanted to play your Mario, your Zelda, your Pokemon, your Metroid, your Donkey Kong, you're going to get a Switch. For everything else, there's Xbox and PlayStation.
That's exactly me, right?
Yeah. And so I think that's been the change. And so 10 years ago it might have been different, like especially with the GameCube. You would buy a GameCube because those were the games that were applicable to you. They barely had any like major MA rated games. Like Eternal Darkness comes to mind, and I think there were a couple of other ones. Like there was a Die Hard one I think I've got somewhere. But otherwise, if you wanted those mature games, you go PlayStation and Xbox. Now you would get both because you might get some mature games or mature themed games like your Fire Emblem and that sort of stuff. They've got mature themes if you're following the story and not just for the gameplay. But otherwise, the Nintendo games are probably, if anything, considered accessible. And then you have PlayStation and Xbox. And we've got a bit of crossover now. Witcher, LA Noire, like some of the sport games that they're starting to come to Switch and all that sort of stuff. Like we're seeing a little bit of crossover there, but they're not selling these games on the Switch to go in direct competition with Xbox and PlayStation. They're probably trying to hit that percentage of players that only have a Switch, that might not have that TV and that home console experience.
And where it's going to change again is with Switch 2, right? Because the rumor is Switch 2 is going to be kind of along the lines of like a PS4 Pro type level powerhouse. And the industry's changed so much where like you look into say like the PS3 generation or even PS4, right? By 4 years into that generation, the PS3 was left to die, right? Just like the PS2 was supported long after, but PS2 was like
outlier.
The DVD player, it was a once in a million type thing. Same thing with the Wii, right? So it was supported for a very long time. But look at say PS4 and PS3. PS3 was ditched pretty quickly, right? We got God of War 2, we got a few smaller games. Oh, sorry, I'm talking PS2. We got Sly Cooper 4 on PS3. There was a few other titles that released post PS4 launch, but Sony were pretty quick to go Killzone Knack. Like we're moving over. Where Sony still, their big games like Horizon and God of War Ragnarok also launched on PS4. So what will be interesting now is as Nintendo kind of catch up, so to speak, not in terms of being PS5 levels of power, but PS4 levels, which in itself is kind of within the PS5 ecosystem, if you know what I mean.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like the same level because they're already on the next level in a sense. They're ready to go to that next.
Yeah, so
comparison.
like Xbox have Series XS. Sony kind of have that with PS5 and PS4, right? Where the PS4 is still most games are coming to that, right? In terms of new releases, some things are still exclusive, Returnal, Ratchet and Clank, but some of their biggest stuff has been on PS4. So what will be interesting and what Nintendo will be very conscious to monitor is as they move to more of a PS4 Pro level of power, that means they're going to get a lot more of the third-party games, right? That wouldn't be able to run on Switch. But they will then need to be super conscious with their games as the fidelity is going to be increased, that they stick to that formula of game development, which I think they will do. Like, I'm not expecting the next Legend of Zelda to be motion captured.
Unreal Engine 5.
Unreal Engine, even though they could, right? So that's the thing. They have restraint. Where if we move across now to Microsoft, well, let's go to Sony next. If we move across to, say, Sony, who are on the other end of that spectrum, right? They're all about the fidelity. And they're all about the AAA-ness or the AAA style game. That's got them in a very different position. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad position, but a different position with its own caveats. So, are you comfortable that we've covered Nintendo?
Yeah, we'll move on. Yep.
Yeah, let's go to Sony. I'll let you start with this one because I've been blabbering on about Nintendo for far too long, and I feel like I've stolen the mic.
That's all right.
Yeah.
So with PlayStation and kind of, well, their direction's been interesting because, especially since they had the games as a service, the whole thing, which is now been kind of returned a little bit, and they're working out exactly what sort of games they're going to do. But we've got to keep in mind that these game cycles, because they take so long, like they're not just looking at, okay, well, we need to release this game in the next 3-4 years. Is that going to be a PS5? They're looking at, okay, so how can we make this work for the PS5 Pro? And then potentially, like, depending on what their
PS6.
life cycle is, PS6, which is already in talks about the next generation already getting worked on, which it blows my mind, especially considering that, they came out 2020, 2021. But when you think about it, that's about right. Like, we're, 3-4 years into development.
Yeah.
You got, 8 years of development. So we had, the PS4 came out in 2014, or 2013, 2014. And then we got the PS5 in 2020.
2020. Yeah.
So that's 7 years. So we're already halfway through the PS5's life cycle, if you think about it like that. So they'd be looking at, okay, so how are we going to make things different? Now, PlayStation's in a really good position where they are, console-wise, the market leader. Out of them and Xbox, keep in mind that they don't think Nintendo exists because they're in their own little world. So they're already leading the way. And we've spoken previously about how they're very generational. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts about where you think PlayStation would go in terms of, are they going to be focusing on this PS Pro, try and at least get everything right over the next 3 years, 4 years, which we're still kind of waiting on a game plan as to what they're going to do. And we've spoken about that before. Or are they going to start saying, okay, well, look, we just keep doing what we're doing, but now let's start looking at how can we also have these games available on whatever next iteration that they come out with?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start from, I guess, the broader business, right? From a Sony perspective, we kind of spoke about Nintendo, now Sony.
Yeah.
So the opposite factors that they're kind of dealing with, right? Bigger teams, more expensive staff, longer development times equals bigger game, more budget, needs to sell more, smaller profits. So I think Sony find themselves in a interesting position because they're built themselves up as that high fidelity AAA powerhouse, right? Games like God of War, Horizon, Last of Us, blah, 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 blah. The list goes on. So they find themselves in a position now where they're needing to increase profits. A game like Spider-Man 2 costing $300 million to develop, 3 times more, roughly, than the first Spider-Man game. Now, have you played Spider-Man 1 and 2? Or either?
I have played 1 and Miles Morales. I have not even picked up 2.
All right, 2 is fantastic as well. But the question I was going to ask you is, can you feel the times 3 development budget? And I would argue no. Like, it's an improvement in a lot of ways over Spider-Man 1, but it doesn't look 3 times more expensive, if that makes sense.
I've looked at a fair amount of footage, and it does look very similar to the first Spider-Man. And I'm pretty sure it was the same. I think it was it the same size team that worked on Miles Morales?
No, so the Miles Morales team are doing Wolverine. So Spider-Man 2 is the Spider-Man 1 development team.
Okay, and so the Miles Morales was a different team who are now doing Wolverine.
Yep. Okay. So I think Insomniac have like 2.5 to 3 teams, right? There's the Wolverine team, Spider-Man team, and then the Ratchet team, which is a smaller.
Well, that's the thing. I think that's the argument with PlayStation. Like, even looking at Insomniac, they need 2 to 3 teams in the game's life cycles and how long it takes the development in order to have multiple projects on the run, because they need to have multiple games going. Whereas, look at Nintendo, they can have a smaller team. We're all focusing on one game, do that game, and just release that game. All right, now we start the next game.
Yeah, and then the game sells in the back end. So the issue that Sony's got is they, like, games like, look at Naughty Dog, right? They had Last of Us 2 online, or Last of Us Factions cancelled.
Yeah.
We could be in a world where we don't even get a Naughty Dog game this generation, or it launches right at the tail end of PS5. I don't think that is the case. I think they do have multiple teams. In fact, I know they do. But that's still a situation that may happen, right? If that game gets delayed internally even further, right? So what that means is that their games are needing to sell more just to break even, and the margins are dropping. So I think the margins in 2022 they were making like 9% margin on top of, so they broke even and then made 9%.
Yeah.
Now that's dropping to like 6. So they're facing that issue. But the counter argument to that, which is something Nintendo doesn't face, is Sony make a lot of their money on third party, just natural game sales, being the bigger console. So they basically, what that means is they subsidize their games making less money, but it's helping the brand grow, which then means they earn more money from those people just playing on the hardware, subscribe to PlayStation Plus, FIFA cards, or whatever bullshit microtransactions people are doing, right?
Yeah.
So they've got to balance that. But what they're also doing, and I've noticed a shift, I think over the last maybe 2 years, is looking at other ways to, other development ways to increase profit that isn't porting their games only to PC. That's one part of it. But you look at what Sony's doing and has done and what they'll continue to do. So they've got they've launched into markets that weren't typically console heavy, right? China, Korea. And what do we get out of that? We got the China Hero Project, and we got them working on, say, Stellar Blade in Korea, right? With Shift Up. So what they've done is gone to markets where the cost to develop games is less, untapped markets that haven't got loyalty to one platform or another. You know, look at China, look at Korea, they're mostly PC and mobile. And they're partnering with those studios to make games. So what that means, a game like Stellar Blade, which recently just cracked over 1 million copies sold, is seen as a success, right? Didn't need to sell 6 million to break even. 1 million is enough for them to consider it a success and for that to warrant a sequel. So part of what Sony will need to do is, one, continue to partner with studios in markets where it's cheaper to make a game. Second will be second party or third party deals. And what that is a game like, or third party deal would be a game like Final Fantasy VII, right? Where Sony isn't wearing any of the development costs. They probably pitched in for some of the marketing rights to get the deal and maybe gave Square Enix some money, but they're not holding the risk of the game. Or a second party deal like Stellar Blade, where Sony funded the development of the game to some degree and have exclusivity, but they don't own the team. They're not paying the overhead for the staff salaries, extras, bonuses, blah, 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 blah. So I think that's Sony's path forward. I do think they still need to make the $200-300 million games. They're just going to take longer. We're going to get not less of them. They're just going to be spread out a lot more. Mix that in with games as a service games, which so far they've had success with Helldivers, right? And that's an example of doing more than, that's an example of that strategy threefold. Second party exclusive in exclusivity with Arrowhead, right? They don't own the studio. So again, low risk. Development cost in the country that game was developed in was far less. It sold 12 million copies and estimated to cost about $100 million to develop. So again, major money. They don't own the studio, and they just get that reoccurring income, and it's a games as a service, right? So they're just getting back end money, and as they add in, new DLC and things like that, Sony will make money off that. So I think it has to be a multiple tiered approach. The other layer of that is games coming to PC, which we know makes sense. Hey, old mate refuses to buy a PS5 but wants to play Last of Us. Now it's on PC. There you go. There's $70 free money, right? How much does it cost to port a game? Not that much in the grand scheme of it. The final layer, sorry, I've gone on for a bit, is multimedia, right? And that's where we're seeing the Last of Us HBO show, the Uncharted movie, all those different things. So all that in combination will help, I think, Sony's profit continue to grow. They're the most profitable they've ever been, even though they're making the least amount of money on their games. Is going to help. And that final thing will be, how do we make these games quicker, and how do we not take 5 years to develop them? And I do think that there will be ways in which the studios will do that to some degree. And what I'm thinking, right, I'm no expert, but what I'm imagining would impact this would be AI. not in terms of like AI creating art or AI building out a level or anything like that. That's not what Sony's going to do. But AI in terms of bug testing, AI in terms of play testing, like those types of things, ways that they could do things quicker and get the same outcome. The other thing could be to offshore some of the development stuff, right? Not in terms of the actual game development, but have a team in another country do the assets, right? Like, do the cards, do the trees, the level art, like those types of things that can be done by someone that doesn't need to be at Naughty Dog, right? Who cares who made the car that's in the background of this one shot or whatever. The last point, I think, needs to be a shared ecosystem of development tools. Naughty Dog used to house a team called ICE, right, which was the Initiative for a Common Engine. What that basically was Sony's internal team housed at Naughty Dog that would basically have this one engine that all the teams will use.
Yep.
That kind of faded away, and everyone kind of has their own thing. But we are seeing Decima being used across multiple studios. Like Kojima's Death Stranding is built on Decima, and so is Guerrilla's Horizon games, right? So if they can get a point where like their engine is shared across multiple teams, staff can move in and out. Sony Bend can support Naughty Dog on their game, and vice versa. If a team launches a game, a lot of that development team is kind of just sitting around post-game launch while some of the heads are just, working out what the next project is, right? If it's a single-player game. They're patching it. They might have a small team doing things like that and microtransactions. But realistically, what's an artist doing at Santa Monica once they ship God of War? They're waiting on what's next. But if that team could support Naughty Dog whilst a small team at Santa Monica are building what's next, all those different things in conjunction, I think will help Sony in the long term. Now, that is a very detailed business, analysis, I guess you could say. I'll open it up to you because I've gone on way too long.
I've got another question for you because we love hearing you talk. And this is in regards to, and we spoke about this a while ago, about how Sony was removing themselves from Japan. They were kind of, they had like a couple of touchstones there because they had Square Enix there and that sort of stuff.
Studio Japan, right?
Studio Japan, all that. But they were moving out of Japan because most of their AAA studios are all based in the US, right? And around US, Europe. So I think it's interesting that they're now branching to like Korea and to China. Do you think that they're also going to go back to Japan in terms of like, because we're talking about how Nintendo, they make their games in Japan. It's cheaper to do it there than say, the US or anything like that. Would that make sense and be part of the move? Or do you think that it's, they've done Japan for a little bit. They've got a couple of, friends there, which they'll touch on, but otherwise they're going to steer clear and try, these other larger markets like Korea and China.
Yeah, I think Japan, they kind of, I wouldn't say they shot themselves in the foot stepping back out of Japan at that time because the studios that they had there, all right, you're going to get another history lesson. Studio Japan isn't one team, right? Not like Naughty Dog's Naughty Dog. Studio Japan housed multiple different teams. There was Team Gravity, which are the guys that did Gravity Rush, the Eco guys, Shadow Colossus, blah, 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 blah. There was multiple teams in there. So they restructured, closed a lot of that, and they also had third-party publishing, XDev out of Japan. So XDev is now global. It isn't housed in Japan. I think it's housed in the US, but it's a global thing. And that's where we're seeing the partnerships with like Shift Up and Stellar Blade and Korea, China, things like that. So that went away. That became more global. They closed a lot of those teams because a lot of the studio heads had left. And that's where we got Team Asobi, right? That was one of the teams within Sony Japan. And now that's a formal first-party studio. And that's the Astrobot guys. So their games weren't selling. That's the key. You can have studios in lower cost countries, but if their games aren't selling and aren't moving the needle, well, who cares how much it costs to develop if we're not making money at all? So they have to walk that balance. Oh, yeah, walk that
line.
Whatever the you know what I'm trying to say. So they have to walk that line, right? In terms of making games cheaper, but they also need to sell. The industry has shifted a lot since then. There are now AA, AAA light games like Stellar Blade. I think Stellar Blade's a perfect example. That looks expensive, looks high budget, but the development cost is far less. That's just come with time. At the time that at the time that Sony closed the Japanese studios, their games weren't looking like that. Gravity Rush didn't look like Stellar Blade. So the industry shifted. So they've kind of tapped into these markets where these talented developers who are traditionally mobile developers are somehow making games that look like they cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make. And maybe they're only costing 100 million and not 200 or not 300. Look at a game like Black Myth Wukong, right? Coming out of Game Science China. That's like my most anticipated game for the rest of the year now. That game, not to go on a tangent about Black Myth Wukong, looks incredible. And that I don't think the development cost on that game would be that expensive. It's done in Unreal Engine 5, it's developed in China, so on and so forth. So I don't think we'll see Sony re-enter Japan from a first-party perspective. I would love for them to have one other studio in Japan. They got Polyphony as well, so they got two, I guess, technically. But you'll see them partner. And I think the other aspect of that, which is something that's kind of like people don't want to talk about, is in that AAA space, there's two console manufacturers. One's a Japanese brand in Sony, and the other's Microsoft. And some Japanese developers don't even bother porting their games to Xbox because they don't historically sell. So they're kind of like, well, why should we own and pay for studios if they're just going to make the games exclusive because they're not selling over there to begin with? Like, we're seeing games do that. Would Sony love to have like a Capcom? Yeah, but you don't necessarily need to. And in a world where inflation is as high as it is, the cash rate being as high as it is, I think the days of rapid acquisitions, done. Now it's all about smart partnerships, regions that are cheaper, in different ways, and I think we'll go to Microsoft next, but, we often say Nintendo are on an island of their own, which is historically true, but I do think that is going to change. And why I say that is their hardware is going to be somewhat comparable in Switch 2 to PS4, and which I said is kind of like a PS5 Lite. Microsoft and Sony are both rumored to re-enter the handheld space, and I think they need to compete on that space. And they need to compete with Nintendo-style games. Astrobot is a perfect example of that. All the previews are being positive beyond belief, right? They're talking about it as if it's got that Nintendo magic, which gets me so excited. So I think the landscape is shifting where the younger generation don't care about consoles, right? The average age of gamers goes up every year because it's the same core group aging up every year. They need to go outside of the 250 million core gamers that have kind of pivoted between Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft and go beyond. So how do you appeal to the Fortnite kid or the guy that plays exclusively on their iPad? You go to where the gamers are. That's why Sony brought Savage, right, which is their mobile studio that's been renamed to something stupid that I can't remember. That's why Xbox is doing their Game Pass on Amazon Fire Sticks now, or xCloud, or their handheld that's heavily rumored. They need to go to where people are. So I think Sony's in a interesting spot. They're kind of on the path that they're on. They need to still do their big AAA games, but this year we're not getting a God of War or a Spider-Man, right? But I mean, I'm happy. I had Final Fantasy VII, I had Helldivers, I had Stellar Blade, I had Rise of the Ronin. I'm eating good, Astrobot's coming, Concord's coming for those who care. Like, there is plenty to play. So if they can get people to play games that don't cost as much but look like they do, and the average gamer doesn't know who Naughty Dog is, who it doesn't really matter who's developing it. If it looks like it's an exclusive, well, that will push the needle. So
moving along from PlayStation and about being able to cut costs on teams or time frames in terms of making games, but still having that fidelity and still looking like that AAA game that at its core it truly is. We moved to Microsoft and Xbox and how they've got a different angle that they can run with, and that's basically powered by their xCloud. It's powered by Game Pass. It's powered by the different options that they've got in terms of whether it's third party, but also first party as well. So how do you think in terms of, in a comparison to Nintendo? So I think there was rumors about Game Pass potentially being on the Switch, a while ago or something like that. Where do you think Xbox kind of sits in the grand scheme of things about what they're aiming to do? Because now, we had that, the big scare about consolidation and, everyone's buying up everything. And as you just mentioned, that's probably not looking the case because of how expensive it is. Yeah, you're buying everyone up, but are you actually making games and selling games? And I think Microsoft has started to come around to that. We looked, at what games are coming out this year even, or this year, next year, like first party titles. And I think I saw like an image and PlayStation had like 12 and Xbox had like 30 something.
The roadmap.
Yeah, the roadmap image. Or whatever it was. We've been talking about Xbox and, where are their games and that sort of stuff. And, it was always Gears of War, Halo and Forza. And now it looks like it's just going to be Gears of War. But what are your thoughts in terms of Xbox's
going to me again?
Direction?
You want another 2-hour rant?
This is your TED Talk. I'm just asking the questions.
So I'm not going to talk about their games because we've done that before. I'm not going to talk about them bringing games to other platforms either because that's been covered to death and we've done that. But it's part of.
Yeah, you can listen to one of our recent podcasts.
There you go. Good segue. For Microsoft, I think they are looking at what Nintendo did and said, why are we still doing this? Why are we still going head to head with Sony? Why? Their whole thing's about their strategy is interesting, and I don't necessarily agree with it. Right? With the thinking, not the actual strategy, with the thinking. Now, I'm going to lay it out, and I want your honest take on it, which I know it would be honest anyway.
When do I lie?
Exactly. Their approach is to try to get to the 2 million or billion gamers in the world, right? They always mention that number. And what they're talking about is like grandma who plays Candy Crush. They own Candy Crush now, so that kind of counts. But their whole thing is about expanding the core gamer base beyond that 250 million core gamers that we speak about. My argument to that is not my mum because she doesn't play any games, but lady on the train who plays Temple Run is counted in that number.
Yep.
Is lady on the train who plays Temple Run going to play Gears of War E-Day or Starfield or whatever? I argue no, because in my mind and in my eyes, hardcore gaming is the most easy to get into today than it's ever been, right? You don't, I don't want to pay for a console, or I'll get a Series S, or I don't even want to do that. I'll get Game Pass just on PC and on my tablet and xCloud and blah, 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 blah. It's pretty accessible, right? Games are relatively cheaper, if not free, right, for some games on those devices. So because Starfield's now on the iPhone, right, in this made-up world, how are you going to get lady who plays Temple Run to play a multi-100-hour deep first-person RPG?
Yeah.
There's so many layers to that. Like, it's nearly as simple as like I remember when It Takes Two comes out, right? And I played that with my wife. And have you ever given a controller to a person that's never used a controller before?
Yes.
And what's the first thing they do with the camera?
Well, actually, the first thing they do is they hold the sides of the controller.
Oh yeah,
Without
not
actually
put there.
putting, without
Yeah,
putting fingers on the buttons. They like hold the sides and they're like, okay, so what do I do?
that is true. But the second thing they do is like struggle to get the concept of the left stick moves the person and the right stick moves the head, right, or the camera.
Yeah.
In a third person game. So what I'm
First person.
saying is like just because Starfield's available to 2 billion more gamers, how is it any more enticing than it was when it was on console and PC? Besides the fact that I can play it on the phone.
Yeah.
I think, personally, there is enough core gamers in that 250. That's growing. Like, it is growing. It's just growing slowly, right? They're thinking in a world where our generation dies off and the younger generation doesn't care about PlayStation, Xbox hardware and all that. They just want to play games on whatever. I get that. But I also think as we die off and as that grows, it's not going to grow to the point that the lady playing Temple Run is all of a sudden going to play Elder Scrolls 6 or 7 or whatever it is. I just think they're separate. And I'm interested to see if I'm right, I'm wrong. Like, the guys at Microsoft are much smarter than I am. But in my mind, I agree with their strategy now of software first, which is a very Microsoft thing, right? Office is on every laptop. It's not just on Microsoft Office, Microsoft laptops, all right? You can get Office on everything. I don't care if it's in, Asus, Dell, whatever.
iPhone.
Yeah, so they want to do that, right, with their games and be like, we're on everything. Eventually, it's happening, so whatever, it's going to happen. They'll be on everything. So they're going to see increased sales just based on that, but that's within the 250 million core gamers. Outside of that, it'd be interesting. Like, I don't see those people playing those games. I think it's a completely separate market. And how? Like,
yeah, I think let's use that number. Let's use 2 billion people play video games or some form of game on phone, console, PC, tablet, whatever. Let's say 2 billion people. I think that number is, it's convenient for some arguments. I think it's inconvenient for others. It's convenient when you say there's so many more gamers nowadays. There's so many more people we can reach. But at the end of the day, that's an inconvenient number because it's not an actual target number. I don't think that that's an applicable number.
Yeah.
When you've got Xbox who say, we want to reach more gamers and that sort of thing. At the end of the day, I don't think it's about a title or an actual game. I think the game follows on or follows through with the true plan, which is Game Pass. I think if we change our thinking from they want, the lady on the tramp to be able to play Starfield and play Elder Scrolls 6, and she could play that on her phone. I don't think the question is she actually going to play that? I think the question would be, so would she sign up to Game Pass?
Good point.
Have the access to it, but she'll play Tunic instead. Or she'll play a different game. I think that's kind of the argument that Xbox is going with. Yes, you can have this game available to everyone, but how is it available to them? Chances are they're not going to buy the game because it's on iPhone, but because there's Game Pass on iPhone and there may be games like Temple Run that appeal to her, Game Pass might be the way to go for her to be able to play these other games, and therefore, ipso facto, Starfield...
They're reaching those people.
Yeah, Starfield and Elder Scrolls 6 is available to them.
The question I have then is, it's different because Microsoft actually own King, right? So they own the guys that make some of the stuff, biggest. Yeah, and they've got, Diablo... is it Diablo Immortal? What's the iPhone version of Diablo? Immortal. Yeah. So they've got all that. So I get that, right? But if that's the ultimate goal, you need to have like a game like Oh my god, what's the PlayStation 1 Miiverse game? It's an
Miiverse,
exclusive
Genshin Impact.
Genshin Impact. A game like that, or a game like Fortnite, where it's like the version you play on iPhone is the version you're playing on console, just modified in terms of. If that's the approach, that's going to fundamentally change the brand and change the games that those
And
first-party teams are making.
so if we were to think that way, and we were thinking, okay, so your PlayStation's got your Genshin Impact, which is on mobile and PlayStation, all that sort of stuff. So imagine if you've got your Game Pass subscription and you can play Elder Scrolls Online on your phone.
Sounds horrific.
But that's the equivalent. That's the equivalent. Like in terms of Genshin Impact, have you played Genshin Impact on your phone, by the way?
No, I've only ever played it on.
It actually doesn't play too bad. Yes,
yeah, I heard it.
You've got a lot more like capability and accessibility on console. I've played on keyboard, mouse. I've played controller. I've played on phone. Like it works, right? Yeah, it's not the biggest thing for me because I'd rather have a controller or keyboard and mouse in hand. Elder Scrolls Online could make that jump. It's an example.
Yeah. I think
but it's there.
Yeah, and I think maybe where I'm to kind of dial it back, maybe the strategy isn't to appeal to the lady on the train playing Temple Run. It's to appeal to the kids of today who are playing Fortnite on their phone, who have an understanding of game, real games.
So ladies' kids.
Yeah. And who one day will be an adult, who won't play on console, but will have a device that plays it. So I guess if that's their approach, is to hit the 2 billion gamers of tomorrow, then yes, maybe they could make that work. But if they're to appeal to today's people, I think the people who are playing on console or on PC are very different to my mum playing whatever Wordsmith on.
Also, I guess in regards to that, if you say that we're appealing to the 2 billion gamers of tomorrow, okay, yep, cool. But the thought process behind thinking about tomorrow, you're going to feel like, okay, as a player today, how does that involve me in a sense? I think if you look at it from, the 2 billion gamers today, you might not necessarily be appealing to the woman on the train playing Temple Run, but if she knows about Game Pass, who's buying it for the kids?
Yeah.
You get them, if she's paying for it, gets them in the ecosystem early, then the moment they become adults, well, they're going to take over the subscription themselves.
Yeah. For me, I would say it's the opposite because I don't think that's happening.
Oh, the kids will be the ones asking mum. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it needs to be the kids are brought up in a world of subscription.
Yeah, but that subscription needs to appeal to the mum as well, in a sense of
enough to. From a value perspective,
yes.
Not because they're interested in the game or the games. It's more like, well, this is great for my kid. Yeah,
exactly. And I think that's the appeal because it might not necessarily be the game, but the thing is, if the kids say, "Hey, we want Game Pass because we want to play these games," mum's got to look at it and say, "Is that value for money? Is that something that I will pay for my kids?" And because
back
that's
to your question, because we've divulged their approach to, I guess, AAA development. Man,
we're getting there. We're getting there.
It is based on that, right? Subsidize the game's development costs by getting it to more players and then subsidizing it that way, plus the subscription route. So, in a perfect world, I think when they initially maybe dreamt up of Game Pass, it was game A may sell less than game B, but the growth that we get from game B will help subsidize the loss from game A.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is the new Halo comes out, it increased subs more than Pentiment did. So you're kind of subsidizing that and you're moving money around. I've always argued that the money numbers doesn't make sense, and I think that's kind of been proven out. So I think what they need to do is go to everybody. How they will reduce development costs, all that is going to be similar to Sony in terms of, offshoring development. Microsoft have contract developers a lot. Like you look at 343, they have this continuous churn of contractors. So that, offshoring some things, AI, like all those things I mentioned for Sony, apply to Microsoft. Movies, TV shows, Fallout, etc., Halo. I think the only difference is how I said Sony may have really expensive games, but that helps push the brand forward, and then they make games on all third party. That is what's different to Microsoft, because Microsoft can't do that. They're making big, expensive games. I'm not saying they're not doing that.
Yeah.
Gears, Starfield, but it's not pushing console sales, which means less consoles out there, less people playing on the console, less people spending money on the console.
And so
it's now shifted to the service.
Yeah. It's not about how many consoles are out there. Yes, that's one part of it, but it's about how many people are subscribed. And for a lot of brand new games, like Starfield, for example, that game comes out at $110, $120. You've either got a, yes, I'm going to buy it because I want to play that game, or nah, it might not be my thing. Or you've got the gateway of, well, I'm already paying $14.95 as a subscription, or $15.95 or whatever as a subscription. That it's basically free. Girl math. I'll give it a go. And so, I think that's where that's where it's not necessarily growth, but that's where their main income comes and all that sort of stuff. They've got an opportunity with their AAA games where, they've got that subsidized income from Game Pass, whereas PlayStation's got PlayStation Plus, but that's a little bit different. I think that's like Game Pass, but Game Pass has the first party day one release. It's
Sony's one's just like the cream on top, where Microsoft, it's the cake itself.
Exactly. So I think that's where, there is the difference that Microsoft had. And I think there's a little story that I read during the week, which I think you'll get a kick out of this. Let's go back 5 years ago. All right. So 5 years ago, 2019 or so, there was a game by Bethesda that was not doing too well, and that was Fallout 76. And so the idea behind, Bethesda's kind of under the pump at the moment. Their main game that they were pushing super hard in this MMO game was failing. They needed to build the hype. They needed to get people interested again. So what did they do? They announced Elder Scrolls 6. Just a little trailer to say, it's a thing. It's going to happen. They've only just started development on it, like primary development on it, in the last 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
It's been 5 years. And so when you look at like some of the interviews around some of the developers regarding that, and this goes to the point I mentioned all the way at the beginning of the show, they announced that game to kind of save face and to get people interested, to then say, oh, well, if that's coming, well, hang on, it's going to come to Game Pass. Well, let me look at Game Pass and see what else is there. And they've been able to build that hype. And so, they don't have the figures necessarily, but there is an expectation that Game Pass sales actually were risen off the back of that, rather than the failure of Fallout 76, almost like hiding it. But it also means that, hey, we've told you about this game, expect it at some stage, and that kind of locks in, if there is enough hype for it, that the team's not going to go anywhere.
And the last prediction I'll make, bit of a bold one. If Call of Duty does not move the needle in any material way, we will see day-and-date launches for Bethesda, Activision, and some of Microsoft's internal games by 2028.
You reckon, in terms of first party on other platforms?
Yep.
You think Call of Duty Black Ops is the...
Well, they're yeah. I think that's the linchpin. I think they said Starfield increased subscription rates by 1%, which is, I think, besides maybe a Halo and Call of Duty, the largest pop Microsoft was ever going to get from a single game. If that only moved the needle 1%, if Call of Duty does not skyrocket Game Pass subscriptions or hardware, which that probably is less likely because it's not exclusive.
Yeah.
By 2028 or from 2028 onwards, I would suspect we see day-to-day launches on PlayStation.
I already don't think that's the case. I
don't think it will either.
I think we'll get a little bit, sure, but maybe that 1%, like Starfield, if that. But
it'll be more than that, but I don't think it will be more than...
Not enough.
Not enough. That's my prediction.
People will play Call of Duty for the multiplayer.
Or they just play Call of Duty. And if you're only playing Call of Duty, it's cheaper to just buy the game than pay a recurring thing.
Well,
so
that's
my prediction.
But that's the thing.
Yeah.
Is it cheaper to buy the game outright and pay Xbox Gold subscription, or is it cheaper to get Game Pass Ultimate?
Look, I think for the people that are just playing
Same
Call
price.
of Duty and that's the only game they play, they're not thinking
$120 plus your $80 fee, so that's $200, and $15.95 over 12 months is $194, $196. It's the same price.
It's the same price.
If
and they get the game.
Yeah,
They
well,
get
that's
to
the
keep
thing.
it.
You get the game and you get your membership, or you get the game, you get your membership, and you have access to other games. If that message, which hopefully is the Xbox message that comes out, if they're going to take this seriously, if you can bring that message that you can either buy one game and a membership to online only, or you get Game Pass, which has the membership, the game, and this whole other library of games, same price. If you don't get a bump in memberships from that, you've lost the plot.
Yeah. And I don't think that's going to happen.
Which is wild. Imagine the incredible value of Game Pass.
Mhm. So that's my prediction. 2028. We'll check in.
All right, we'll check in 4 years' time. We do have one last topic that we'll just touch on because we are getting pretty long. We had a lot to talk about. Our wishes have finally been granted, or at least they're on the way.
Have they?
PS3 backwards compatibility potentially on PS5. There's been a couple of news stories that have come out over the last couple of weeks. Josh, do you need to change your pants?
I've been yelling about this for 4 years on podcasts. Yeah, so I think Xbox Era, fellow Australian podcast, one of the guys on there had heard that Sony was developing and testing some form of backwards compatibility for PS3 on PS5. That was collaborated and kind of corroborated by Jeff Grubb, who's another industry podcaster and known leaker. I actually think Colin Moriarty on Sacred Symbols was the first one to kind of talk about this a while back. So I guess I would say he was the first one to really bring this to
legitimately.
Legitimately. It's exciting. And as of yesterday, breaking news, as of yesterday, Mark Cerny, who is lead system architect at PlayStation, filed a patent for backwards compatibility testing in software. I think it's happening.
You reckon so?
I think it's happening, but what I think... Look, let me bring expectations down a little.
Yeah. Okay.
It isn't going to be the Xbox system of put your disc in and you get the game for free. It's going to be a slow rollout of games that will be added to PlayStation Plus, Deluxe, and or Essential, whatever the top tier one is in the US. We have Deluxe here in Australia. No. It's so stupid, the naming convention. It'll be added to PlayStation Plus and or can be purchased as a separate purchase, like Sly Cooper was $14. Only. Digital only. Don't expect you put your disc in and the game unlocks for free. That I don't think will happen.
Yep.
And don't think every game's coming day one. Cell architecture is known to be very difficult to develop for, and each team in each game developed for it was using the cell architecture differently than the next game. So that means they can't just blanket port games. They have to go in game by game and port each individual game across. So expect a slow rollout of games. But ultimately, this is still a win in my eyes. If we can get some of those Metal Gear Solid 4, Resistance, Infamous,
Killzone.
Those style of games that are locked onto PS3 over a period of time, and I have to pay for them, I think that's a win in the sense that it guarantees that game being forward compatible moving forward. Because once it's purchased on PS4, PS5's ecosystem, that's it. Like PS6 is going to be backwards compatible, PS7, because that's just the way that these consoles are basically PCs now, right? We're never going to go back to the
PS3
days
Vita.
of proprietary systems and things like that. So just be prepared to pay for them. I'd love for them to be like put a
What do
disc
you
in
reckon?
and
$20,
unlock.
$30?
I would say $20. If a PS2 game's $14.99
or Australian?
maybe I reckon 20 Australian.
You reckon 20 Australian for a PS3 game?
Well, if PS2 games are 15 Australian, I don't know, maybe $24.99.
See, I'm feeling that 25 to 30 range.
Yeah,
I reckon they're just going to
potentially.
milk it.
Potentially. I wouldn't be surprised. Like
All right. And so what's
But
the
if
first?
they're there, I'm happy.
Okay, so if you could have one game, the first game, cab off the rank, that you could purchase and play on your PS5, what would it be?
My heart would go to Metal Gear Solid 4, but I feel like that's coming in the Metal Gear Collection Part 2, so we could probably leave that. I would bring Infamous across and or Resistance.
As a bundle.
Or Infamous, yeah. Well, no, they'll probably do them one by one. Like it'd be like how we got Sly Cooper.
I reckon Resistance. I think it's
Resistance
or the other one was
PlayStation All Stars or something.
The other one was, I think it was Motorsport.
Yeah, Motorsport. Yeah. There's heaps. There's so many games that are locked to PS3. Yeah, this is exciting if true, and I think it is true. Like there's just too much whispers. We're getting patterns. We're getting this and that. But yeah, just expect it to be a slow rollout.
All right, and so with that, I want to ask you as well. So you've just mentioned as well, like we've had some of the PS2 games come to the PlayStation Store that you're able to purchase for $15. You've been playing one of them, haven't you?
Yeah. Sly Cooper, the Thievius Raccoonus, my beloved Sly, and I'm so excited to hear that this has been the most successful PS2 classic to date, according to the game's sales and I think tracking on like PlayStation backend.
Yeah,
awesome. There is a hardcore. That's actually the first game I'd bring across. Sly 4. Which is locked behind PS3 and Vita. Developed by Sanzaru, who I believe is owned by Facebook now. But anyway, Sly Cooper, Thievius Raccoonus. Yeah, I've been playing through that. I've finished it, actually. I mean, it's not a perfect port. Like, it's the PS2 version. It isn't the PS3 up-res Bluepoint Collection version. But it's just so good to go back. Like, Sony can do this now. They have the legacy IP that they can do the Nintendo approach and just kind of drip feed. And then Jak and Daxter, the whole thing's on there, but you know what I mean. Sly Cooper, God of War 1,
Ape Escape.
Ape Escape, and start doing all those things. They're not Sony games, but like Devil May Cry, like all the interesting, fun stuff. So yeah, I've been playing through or had finished Sly Cooper on the Portal as I watched podcasts on TV. Finished that, and then I moved over to the DLC for Alan Wake 2, which, glad to be back in the world of Alan Wake. So there's like 3 separate stories that kind of you buy as part of the deluxe upgrade. So I've only played through the first one. You play as, I forget the character's name, I think it's Emily. She's the waitress at the cafe, and the story is Alan Wake contacts her through, those talking, those fishes that are on the wall that kind of flip-flop.
The bass singers.
Yeah. Alan contacts her through that, and then she goes on like this murderous spree in like this dream world. It's so like trippy. But I think the next 2 DLCs link in with Quantum Break to some degree, or at least kind of teases that idea. And then with Control as well, which is obviously all part of that Remedy universe. So I'm super excited to get to those 2 parts. And then I went back to Elden Ring. We spoke about if I had the heart or energy to go back to that world. And you
said no.
I said no, because it is like a full-on thing. But everywhere I looked online, it was just Elden Ring. And I'm like, don't do it. Stay away. And I'm like, oh, this game looks too... It's... Elden Ring, as much as it might not be my favorite game of all time, it's... If all games could just be that well crafted in terms of like open world design, in terms of quest design to some degree, where you feel really entrenched in the world and you really are exploring as opposed to like going to a question mark on a map. But anyway, I loaded into Elden Ring and I got smacked straight away by a bear and just killed like instantly. So I deleted and uninstalled it. And then I'm like, I'm not doing it. Like I can't. Then I reinstalled it again. And I'm like, oh no. And then I defeated Moog, who's the second boss you need to have defeated to unlock or to, get access to the DLC. So I am now at a point where I just need to purchase the DLC and I'm ready to go.
Yep.
They have patched the game or recalibrated the DLC to make the first half of the DLC, because basically, regardless of your level, when you enter the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, it basically puts everyone back onto a level playing field, and then there's different ways of upgrading that is exclusive to the DLC that doesn't have effects in the main game. So what people were doing is all those, people that have New Game Plus walking in thinking that they could just steamroll the DLC were getting smacked. And I don't know if you saw the online discourse around the negative reviews on Steam and things like that, but they have recalibrated it. And I think maybe that, I don't know if it was that was probably like, okay, maybe I should give this a crack.
You basically got to start again.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to do it. I'm going to finish Alan Wake, and then I've got a friend who's platinumed Elden Ring, and we've agreed to go co-op for parts of it. So that's been me. I haven't had too much time to play. Started a new job. Did my first week. You know what it's like when your brain feels like it's going to explode because you're trying to absorb all these different bits of information.
Yeah.
But that's been me. But what about you? What have you been up to? What game from the 70s have you been playing now?
Yeah, I haven't been playing too many games because I've had a few things going on in the past couple of months. A few close passings away, as it were, walk in the clouds, as I like to call it. So I've been trying to play cute little funsy games just to make me feel good about myself. And at the moment, I'm playing Super Pokemon Rumble on the 3DS, like little twist up Pokemon toys. It was a WiiWare game, and then the sequel.
I think I remember it.
Sequel
top down?
came. Yeah, top down.
Yeah.
The sequel came out on the 3DS. Here's a little trivia fact for you: it was the first Pokemon physical release on the 3DS.
There you go.
There's a little fun trivia fact for you. So I'm playing that. I'm up to I think I'm nearly up to, or I'm one dungeon away from the final chapter. So I'm nearly at the end. This is a save file that I had when the game first came out, by the way.
I love that stuff. And I love that.
I was like at world 2.2, and I was like, all right, let's just do it. There's only 5 worlds.
Yeah.
I had to look it up. I was like, how much am I in this game? No. So I've basically done most of the game now in the last 2 weeks. So nearly finished that. And I've been playing a few different Wii U games. And there's a reason. There's a method to the madness. So the Wii U's currently are on the way out in terms of as a console. The hardware is failing. They've had their 10-year period. Basically, the base Wii U, the white one, that basic one, is solid. But there's 3 different chips that you can get in the Wii U consoles, and a lot of the black ones are starting to get errors because of this.
Can I just stop you there?
Yeah.
Did you ever think, this is to the listeners out there, in 2024 you would have heard the words, the Wii U is on the way out? I think it's been on the way out since 2012.
Came out November 30, going out December 2nd or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm now looking at my collection, and thankfully a lot of my Wii U games that I would have played, most of them are getting or have been ported to the Switch. So I don't have to worry about your Mario Kart and that sort of stuff. Like, that's easy. But I'm going through some of the exclusive games that are on there. Like, I'll look at Star Fox Assault and a couple of others. I think it's Star Fox Zero, sorry.
Platinum one, yeah.
Yeah, so Star Fox Zero and I think Wonderful 101, that's on Switch now, so I don't have to worry about that one.
That's on Switch, yeah.
There's a fair few that have been moved to Switch, like the big games. But a lot of the ones that are only released on Wii U, I'm starting to play through them because I know at some stage I'm going to turn on the Wii U and it's not going to work.
Gonna
And
do what my PS3 did,
it's
right?
not. Yep, they're not built how they're used to with the 64, where you roll over with the car and it still works as long as you blow on the cartridge 16 times. So I'm going to get as much use out of the Wii U as I can because I know that it's a ticking time bomb and it's on the way out. And after the couple of months that I've had where it's like, if you don't do anything, everything could just end at any moment. I'm like, nope, I'm taking my opportunities now. Elden Ring will still be there in 3 years' time. I don't have to stress about that, but I might not be able to play Game Party Champions. So
what would you do?
Exactly.
What would you do?
I never played Devil's Third. Well, I played about 5 minutes of it, but I didn't really get into Devil's Third. Remember that game?
No.
On the online third person shooter / sword fighting game that had servers. I think it was Wii U exclusive. And then the servers shut down. I think it was 8 months later or something like that. Still have that. Can't play it now. And it's like, that's a shame. Well, move on to the next one, like Captain Toad Treasure Tracker or something like that. So that's going to be my plan for the next, I think, couple of weeks at least. I got so many old retro games that to play through.
I was going to say no comment. It apparently had no background and
you've got a nice background. It's getting there. Yeah.
Can you name the 4 games on the top?
We could barely see them, but I know there's a Final Fantasy one there.
There's Final Fantasy 7?
Yep, Metal Gear.
Yep.
Crash?
Yep.
I think it's Spyro.
Correct. There you go.
Yeah, you've got it on blur, so I'm I can't see.
You just go off the
I'm going off the little shape. That's a
great for audio listeners.
Yeah. I'm looking at your PS2 collection. I'm like, I just see PS2 games. No platinums, no nothing.
I don't do platinums.
Except for that PS2. One passive. There's a couple of platinum PS1 games I see in the background.
PS1, yes, because I feel like they're less egregious than the PS2 covers. I just felt like they looked horrific. I've actually had to replace games in there that I had on platinum. I'm like, I'm not putting this on display. You're getting out.
Yeah.
And I just purchased for 35 Australian dollars, which I think was a good deal, for Devil May Cry 1, 2, and 3 complete. So
okay.
That series is now. I mean, I was looking at it before. I haven't got too many, but I've got a lot of the main stuff. I've got all the Sly Coopers. I've got Sly 2 sealed.
You got all the Jak and Daxters?
All the Jak and Daxters, including X, the racing game.
Yeah, I've got
all the Ratchet and Clanks.
Yep.
All the Siphon Filters. The God of Wars 1 and 2. All the Grand Theft Autos. All the Devil May Cry.
What about all the Gran Turismos?
All the Gran Turismos. All the Prince of Persias. So I've got I'm starting to build out, I think, a pretty solid collection. If you see me starting to collect, I don't know, Buzz, shoot me.
Hey, I've got them all.
Doesn't surprise me. But, that's the way I'm building it out. Same with the PS1, right? I'm not going nuts. But anyway, we've gone too long, so let's just...
Yeah, we have... this has been a fairly lengthy episode, but
I think a good discussion.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about regarding what Nintendo's doing and how they're able to be effectively independent from the conversation with PlayStation and Xbox. And it's why I love Nintendo. I love what they do. And regardless of whether or not a game intrigues me, it's always good to see that they're able to, stand on their own 2 feet. They don't have to rely on gimmicks. They only figured out what the internet was a few years back. So, they might be a little bit slow, but the thing with a Nintendo game is there's always quality. Always quality. I don't know a single bad Nintendo game except for all of those shovelware Wii titles when they went on that absolute massive binge and just said, yep, whatever you want, make a Wii game, go nuts.
Bring it in.
Anyway, thank you very much for joining, Josh. It's been very nice listening to your TED Talks.
I was going to say, I'm sorry. This is the stuff that I love. And that was what I was going to say. Make sure you, if you're listening to this, we had a really, not to just toot our own horns. I feel like we had a really good in-depth conversation, a real educated conversation. So share this out there because I don't feel like there's enough of this level of integrity going on in this space.
And if there's a topic that you wanted us to touch on, you can always comment in the comments and who knows, we might get around to to talking about it if it's worthy of a TED talk.
Exactly. I can't believe I had it in me to do a tangent on Nintendo for so long. But
You're secretly a closeted Nintendo fanboy. I mean, look at the bottom shelf there. Yeah, I see it. Don't worry, I see
Switch. Super Nintendo there, yeah.
All right, but anyway, that's us for this week. This has been episode 6 of Busy Playing Something. Remember, if you haven't already, like the video, give us a comment, tell us hi. You can follow us on social media
5
as well.
stars.
Yeah, 5
if you're listening
stars.
on audio feeds every Thursday at 9 a.m.
That's right. And so we're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify for the audio, for video, obviously here on YouTube. You can follow myself at Holy to Prawn on X. You can follow Josh at Joshua LaRosa. And we're at Busy Playing Something podcast, I think it is overall, or something like that. I don't know.
Busy underscore playing.
Yeah, busy underscore playing. There you go. But otherwise, Josh, thanks for coming along. And now that PS3 backwards compatibility is seemingly on the way, you got any other comments you want to make before we, claim credit?
Vinny, can you fix my PS3, please?
Yeah, all right. Yeah, Vinny, fix his PS3. Yeah, good one. All right. See you guys later.
Bye.